Hello everybody and welcome back to this week's video. And at this week's video, as you might realize, we're going to actually stop the Jeremiah book for a fewish weeks. Because of course, every time during this period of the year, we have a very bespoke event that we have to be ready to celebrate and to reflect upon. And that is being the Lord's Memorial. So we're going to be discussing about this serious matter in these few weeks, of course. So we're going to start, of course, with the basics once again. We're going to start off with how it was seen and how it was taking place in the Old Testament and slowly bring ourselves back into the knowledge of understanding how this process must be celebrated and must be taken place upon those who have been baptized. So let us start with the Exodus chapter in the Old Testament. In Exodus chapter 12, where we can see God had given Israel very clear instructions about how to carry out the first Passover. Notice how there's two different words of what I use at the start of being the Lord's Memorial and the Passover, because these two things are not the same thing, but rather the representations of how it is changed over time based on when it has happened then and how it happened once Jesus Christ had sacrificed himself, of course, and then it became what is known as the Lord's Memorial. So during this period in the Exodus 12 chapter where it talks about the Passover, we can see each word itself had a detailed meaning. This was the night when God would deliver Israel from Egypt, and it became a clear picture for us itself of our deliverance through Christ, we can see as well, that would take place. Because first we can see it was said each household was to take a lamb on the 10th day of the first month. See. The lamb was, of course, to be without blemish, we can see, and a male of the first year. And this was to show the purity and perfection and points forward towards Jesus Christ and how he was a soul of perfection and without sin. So to provide that representation, they were told to find and provide a lamb without blemish, we can see. And a lamb was to be then kept till the 14th day, and then the whole community of Israel were to kill the lamb in the evening of that 14th day, we can see. And this is kind of once again similar to how Jesus was examined before his death and then sacrificed at the proper time in God's plan. Just like that, the lamb is killed at a bespoke time in the evening, and it is done by everyone, and at that same time the lamb is examined before its death. And then we move on to the next component of this. Well, this is the main structure of how they were to organize what was to take place in the Passover. The blood then comes into play. Of course, the blood of the lamb was very important as well, as they were told to put the blood of the lamb on the two side posts and the upper doorpost of their houses, we can see. As God said that when he saw the blood, he would pass over these houses and the firstborn inside would be spared. Because of course we have to also relate to the understanding of how it's in this period of time when God is acting on the last commandment against Egypt for their constant turbulence against Israel. And God is of course doing the firstborn killing process, and to make sure the people of Israel stay safe, this process has been initiated. So the blood was not put inside the house as well. That's a key thing we need to understand, but it is outside where everyone can see it. And this teaches us that the salvation depends on the applied blood of the sacrifice, we can see. It depends where we show who we truly are, we can see. Because if we hide in fear to show what we are and hide inside, there is no showing of strength or true strength or faith. Because if we don't do that, we are nothing short of a Christian of wrong understanding and wrong understanding of truth, we can see. So the blood represents the life given and how we must show who we are as God's children. But as the blood protected Israel's firstborn, the blood of Christ protects the believers from condemnation, we can see. So there's that, once again, that duality of how it's represented in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and how there is very much very close similarities we can see. And then we move on to the next step of the lamb's process for this Passover event, and that was the lamb was to be roasted with fire and eaten at the same night. Was not to be eaten raw or boiled, we can see. It was to be roasted with fire and eaten at the same night. As we can see, fire is often used to represent trials and suffering. Jesus went through these fiery trials, we can see, and suffering before his eventual death. And we can see alongside this, the lamb was to be eaten with unleavened bread and bitter herbs as well, as the unleavened bread is used to represent the sincerity and truth that was to be shown in this event, because leavened bread in the Bible often represents the idea of sin. And the bitter herbs were used to remind the understanding of the bitterness the people of Israel had to experience as in slavery in Egypt, but also the bitterness we can see when it comes to the New Testament, the bitterness of sin and the suffering in the world that people are succumbing to, we can see. As they were told not to leave any of the lamb until the morning, of course. What remained had to be burned with fire if unable to complete, as that was the key understanding that was to be said. If it is not done by night, it has to be burned before the morning, we can see. This shows that the sacrifice was to be complete and not to be treated carelessly. If it is done so, you are the ones who are going to experience the pain. So, we can understand that this is how God is trying to convey this idea of the Passover to the people. He's trying to bring that seriousness in to them, we can see. Alongside that, they were also told that none of the bones of the lamb were to be broken. So another condition has been put in place where how they should eat this lamb. None of the bones of the lamb should be broken. This detail was fulfilled in Jesus as well, we can see, which is even more beautiful, that none of his bones were broken at his actual crucifixion, we can see. As the people were to eat the Passover, dressed and ready to travel with their loins girded, shoes on their feet, we can see, and staff in hand. As if they were going to travel, they had to dress up in this manner, as God had said, because this was to show the readiness of their faith and their readiness towards the strength of the Lord, because they believed that the deliverance was coming that very night, we can see, of course. In the same way, God's people, we can see, live in readiness, trusting in his promises, we can see, because this was to show that clear understanding of faith. And once again, there's that duality of now and then. So again, it's showing how God's plan is forever growing and forever there. Then that night the Lord struck the firstborn of Egypt, but passed over the houses marked by the blood, of course. This judgment showed the difference between those under the blood and those not under it. Once again, how I spoke before, those under the blood, those not on it. We can see those were the ones who were in the faith and were passed over, and those who ultimately experienced suffering, we can see. But overall, after these events, the Pharaoh allowed Israel to leave. Their deliverance began, though, we need to understand, though, with the blood of the lamb, though. It's because of the blood of the lamb they have been almost, you could say, have overpowered the supremacy of Egypt, because God commanded that this Passover, after this point, we can see, after this succession from Egypt, to be kept as a memorial throughout their generations. And it was to remind them that deliverance came not just by strength, but by God's provision of a sacrifice, but also God's provision of faith and following faith no matter what. So, in summary, Exodus 12th chapter teaches us that deliverance comes through a perfect lamb. It always comes through that idea of a perfect lamb, that the blood must be applied and that the sacrifice involves suffering. We can say that God's people must live in sincerity and readiness, and their redemption from the mistakes they've made totally relies on God's grace and how you are truly willing to come back from what you have done. So the Passover was not really, or not only, I should say, it was escape from Egypt. We can say once again, we're going to bring the duality in, that it was a beautiful picture of the greater deliverance that would come through Jesus Christ. So that's how truly beautiful the Passover is. And we're going to discuss more, talk more in the few weeks that we have leading up to the Lord's Memorial when it comes. So thank you. And we'll continue more about this in the following weeks. Thank you. Bye.